Hey everyone, and welcome to Human Centered, brought to you by VMLY&R. I'm Nick Brunker, Director of Experience Strategy and your host for the show. Thanks for dialing us up. On every episode of Human Centered, we explore how brands both large and small are creating meaningful customer experiences and discuss how professionals like you can tap into CX best practices to create value and gain traction in transforming your business. On today's episode, we're going to share how you can build a compelling ROI case to lead CX transformation with your business, brands, and clients, and the building blocks needed to tell the right story. To do that, I'm so pumped to be joined today by a fellow Cincinnatian and Managing Director of our advisory practice, Colin McDowell. Colin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you having me.
Before we dive in, would love for you to share a little bit more about your career path to where you are today and what keeps you busy.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Again, thanks for having me on, and looking forward to getting into the topic a little bit more. But just to frame up myself a little bit here, so I have, I guess you could call it somewhat of a unique background within the quote marketing and agency world. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I'm probably likely one of only a handful within definitely VMLY&R, maybe even WPP as a whole, who actually started out their career in the corporate finance world. So it's actually been something that I've realized over the course of my tenure within the agency world that has given me a little bit of a unique perspective across what is, I guess, our traditionally creative and innovation and technology-driven business. And so it's kind of a little bit about like the DNA of how I'm built and where I came from. And within that, what comes naturally to me are things like optimizing P&Ls and driving capital efficiencies, for the corporate finance side of the world. But I really, as I kind of got into that part of my career, started to just look for a broader challenge. Really, I think was the goal for me. And so, I at some point along my career decided it was time to move into more of an agency-like environment, and I joined a company called Rockfish Digital. Startup-sized agency at the time, ultimately became one of the top innovation agencies within the U.S. And my focus there was really on driving, marketing, technology, and experience-like innovation for Fortune 100 B2B and B2C companies. And so it got my start into the agency world, kind of building and growing an agency alongside some really smart folks. And then, at some point down the line, VMLY&R and Rockfish joined forces, and that was when I was given the opportunity to shift focus to really just accelerating the advisory group that existed within VMLY&R when I came in. And so a lot of what we do is consult clients on growth acceleration, looking at transformative customer and brand experiences, what that means for their business, their operating models, all that fun stuff. And so it's been quite a journey. And it's been really, really fun to watch all of these different companies grow alongside me as I've taken on different opportunities here and there.
Well, and if you even think about the last 5 years, things have accelerated so quickly. The pandemic, of course, part of that, but just generally the way business is done, shifting from what we've talked about in the past as like the awareness era to the engagement era to now the experience era. The work that you do, and obviously the work that you help clients do when you work with them, that's changed drastically even over the last 5 or 7 years. That's got to been pretty interesting for you as you've kind of shifted your work over the years too.
Yeah, 100%. It's been honestly one of the catalysts to getting into more of a digitally type of enabled work environment was around the invention of the iPhone. I think everybody took that as an opportunity to say, wait a minute, text message marketing all of a sudden got a whole lot more exciting. What should we be doing to drive more always on types of experiences with customers that create relevance as opposed to noise? And that paired with data just gave us the ability to do some really interesting things that weren't happening in the corporate finance side of the world. No knock on that group, but gave me an opportunity to push into new spaces for me personally. And so, yeah, no, it's been really interesting. And to your point, as things have kind of evolved over the last several years, the last year has been really interesting as well for, I think, everybody. Myself personally, outside of my day to day, I've got a family of 4. My wife and I have 2 daughters, and it's always an adventure, right? Especially within the environment of trying to figure out how to be a teacher alongside a professional, alongside, a daycare provider and all that fun stuff. And so definitely always an adventure. And that's kind of a little bit about, who I am as a person, just seeking out adventure and looking for any opportunity to be out there in some environment that's interesting where I can get some adrenaline pumping. Sign me up.
There's plenty of that in today's world, not only being a full-time parent, but as CX transformation goes, it is is definitely frenetic, that's for sure. Colin, the value of CX transformation is well documented across numerous industries. For example, Forrester estimates for a general retailer that just a 1-point improvement in a CX index score equates to more than $500 million in incremental annual revenue for the company. While not all industries are that staggering, the impact is still the multi-millions of dollars on average. Yet, when you look at CX maturity levels in aggregate, the vast majority would be considered at the beginner level. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. I mean, I think, generally speaking, I like to simplify things as much as I can. So you'll see that as a theme maybe throughout our conversation, but just kind of, rationalizing it against something like laws of motion, right? Large objects that are, in this case, organizations, stay in motion unless some outside force acts upon them. And so, the larger the object, the larger the force needed to create some measurable change in velocity. And that's true for, I think, a lot of really big organizations. Short-term pressures tend to win out, honestly, in most attention of executives, and whether that be things like global economics and edge case scenarios, supply chain shortages, obviously shareholder pressures, et cetera. The promises of future downstream growth that CX can provide, it really sometimes, unfortunately, isn't enough of a nudge to change the velocity of an organization. When you look at some, companies that are maybe doing this really, really well, or have higher levels of CX maturity, I would say they tend to be, I'm a little biased in this, but they tend to be obviously a little bit younger, more agile, a little bit more lean. And, a lot of them were designed from the inside out with customer-centric business models. And so, some of these industrial incumbents are finding it, I think, over the last 10 years, that this is a space that becomes not only a mandatory for the future, but is also starting to be, something that they've got to compete in today. Where traditionally they may have relied on scale through things like supply chain, logistics, all those sort of things. As certain industries start to commoditize, the experience is becoming now essential to current business as opposed to future business. And so I guess there's your, if you will, burning platform for transformation right there.
And it is an investment. And I think part of the tough part is to be able to, as we talk about on this episode, craft that story for executives and essentially asking for budget. What are some things to have in mind as you figuratively set the table for building that strong case?
Yeah, great question. Lots of things probably go into that. I mean, maybe easiest to just start with the wrong way to pursue capital investment from leadership. And that would probably be just simply saying, something like, hey, boss, I need $2 million for a CX project. So that, let's just start with the wrong way. Probably likely the best would really be, framing up like the ask ultimately in meaningful business and customer value. So if you try to frame up your proposal, your recommendation in one of those, you tend to miss out on a big opportunity and key, way to describe the value equation. And so it's good to keep in mind also as you do this, that you're competing with others for an often finite pool of cap and OpEx funds. And so, again, just thinking about ways to keep this simple, I often kind of just look at the one sentence business case as being the way to not get caught up in assumptions, interrogation, and that sort of thing. And so, again, the more simple you can make it, the better. And so an example of a one sentence business case would be something like, we propose to do X, a customer benefit, right? In order to create an economic benefit of Y, some sort of business benefit, at the cost of Z, your request, ultimately for resources being the last part. And if done right, that can actually honestly carry 90% of an investment pitch to leadership as you think about trying to lay out the different pieces you'd need to be able to have this really meaningful conversation around a budget and a growth initiative that you have in mind.
Being able to articulate the human benefits and potential upside is obviously a crucial element, but how can listeners answer the ever common question of when will I start seeing ROI?
Yeah, awesome question again. And I think honestly, it's probably in just built into all of us. I mean, my 7-year-old, if she were to give me $1, she'd expect immediate return on that dollar. And so I think, it's just something we have to figure out as we grow in our careers. And honestly, it's a tough question to answer because every business case is different, and what you're trying to achieve tends to be different. I think the important thing just in my mind is to reframe what we mean by, ROI. So instead of saying like, when are we going to see ROI, making sure that we have a common taxonomy around the definition of what success is, and that often doesn't exist within organizations, especially as you're looking to pitch things that are cross divisions, cross business organizations, and those sorts of things. And so, it becomes critical that organizational leaders start to see solving customer pain points, essentially as synonymous with delivering ROI as a taxonomy for defining success. And so that type of mindset helps to stop, having the siloed conversation about measurement and incentives and all of those things, and creates a unanimous agreement around, hey, solving customer pain points actually delivers ROI. We have a formula that says that that's true. Now let's start asking ourselves, how many customer pain points have we resolved, instead of what's, how many points up has revenue or demand, jumped in a day-to-day period. And so then we can start to measure business outcome through metrics that are, impacted by solving customer pain points. But again, I think it's just really around, changing the dialogue. So having a good discussion instead of the, when do I see my dollar back with my 7-year-old, it's more in the mindset of, let's talk about the benefits you're getting for the dollar over the period of time and that sort of thing. So.
And you touched on a little bit of it too, like a couple of examples around the common KPIs, but I think rallying around the shared vision of like, what is success? What gets measured gets done. What are the ones that, if you're just starting out on this process, building up kind of your acumen in this area, should they have in mind, KPI wise, in the back of their mind, that is, when they start to craft the story for executives?
Yeah, I think so. Good. It does vary in my mindset. There's a broad spectrum of, KPIs and success metrics across like a number of different ways to think about the business and customer solutions. And so I admittedly struggled with this early on in my career. And just because there are so many different ways to classify success, you kind of get into this mindset of, do I have to speak the language of this executive? Do I have to appeal to this executive by having these types of metrics? And really the best way that I've found is just kind of start to lay it out in a placemat and categorize the different types of things you want to see improve. And so I look at them in 3 big buckets, and these are kind of industry, best practices, if you will, around how to classify metrics. But really the first is interaction metrics. And these are the most familiar ones, I think, to most people, because they're generally operationally focused. So things like, handle time and service downtime, how long I'm without my thing that you've sold me, those sorts of things, repeat calls. That's just an easy area to start to understand what metrics might be within the scope of the initiative that we're pushing forward. So that's one territory. The next would be perception metrics. So, these often, honestly, when in the engagements that I've been involved in, are the most unfamiliar to individuals, because they actually require organizations to ask really uncomfortable questions of themselves. So things like, how satisfied are my customers really? Like, how easy is it to actually do business with us? Those types of questions aren't really popular because they start to shine a big spotlight on potential deficiencies within the organization. But, critical if you're thinking about CX transformation or that type of capability. The last area is really just outcome metrics. And so, to me, this is synonymous with like rebranded loyalty metrics, if you will. So things that are tended to be linked to, product portfolio penetration, customer advocacy, those types of things. So at the outcome of our relationship, what is this customer able to do on behalf of themselves, on my brand, et cetera? And so 3 big categories, and all of them are important and ultimately should be evaluated and explored as far as what to have in the back of your mind. I think, filtering those through things like, who is the audience of what I'm trying to push forward? How do we think about, success in their mindset, but ultimately making sure that the human or the customer problems come first, because it's really easy for people to get behind a story where you can empathize with an illustrative individual, as opposed to making, numbers on a slide. That human side really is a metric that is powerful in itself.
So as you think about the missteps, you mentioned one earlier, where like coming at it saying, I need this money. Obviously, I would imagine few people are going to go into their executive's office and just ask for it. What would you say are the common missteps that our listeners should keep in mind when building this and other parts of the narrative?
So the biggest hazard, I guess I would identify, would be a misaligned view of success. If you haven't done the legwork to unsilo organizations, make sure that you've addressed competing P&Ls, those types of things will kill a business case before it's even presented for leadership approval. Like, it won't even make the cut because you don't have the right vision that drives customer benefit and is then pushed down into organizational benefits. So there's not that common view of taxonomy. And kind of going back to the one sentence business case, if you will, the quote, for an economic benefit of Y, that has to resonate with all of the different stakeholders, not only everyone in the room that you're presenting to, but at the end of the day, everyone who will need to contribute some resource or some brain power to your initiative. And so definitely critical to make sure, like, if you do nothing else, having that unilateral understanding of success that everyone can get behind is probably the biggest misstep I've seen organizations make as they pursue capital investments for CX.
Another challenge I would bet is, you alluded to it, with all the different stakeholders in the game, there are a lot of different opinions on what is priority. Is it in relation to being able to articulate that we all have to kind of have a shared vision? Because the CEO and CFO and the C-suite's going to have an opinion on things, but as you cascade that down through the organization, it's got to be critically important to be able to kind of swim in the same direction, so everybody's working towards the same shared priorities, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, and the more senior leadership support you can get in driving that vision, the better. It's easier to push the boulder down the hill than it is up the hill. So the more you can kind of communicate a vision back that's rooted in the brand strategy at the end of the day, right? What is the customer experience strategy that enables the what you say as a brand is really incredibly important. And making sure that, you have that support across the organization to be able to kind of drive that down is definitely critical. And so some organizations are more mature at that than others. But it kind of is a case by case. But to your point, very critical as a part of the puzzle.
And we talked about the maturity model earlier. And when you look at the data for CX culture, that is a system of shared values, behaviors that employees at all levels of the organization can focus on. More than 8 in 10 in this most recent report from Forrester rank as beginners, which is still shocking to me that after all these years, kind of moving towards the experience era, people rank themselves that low based on the activities they're doing. This would seem to suggest that part of the investment is literally, like you said, people-based. That is giving people the right tools and training to deliver on the vision. So that some of the financials obviously have to play into, potentially process and tech, but you're also having to invest in training. How important is it not only to sell the story to executives, but broadly across the organization as kind of a people investment too?
Yeah, so it's critically important. I mean, at the end of the day, most CX initiatives require every aspect of the organization to collaborate in some capacity. And so, it's one thing for the executive leadership team to shout that from the top down, but it's another thing to make sure that you have not only just the right tools and training in place for the organization, but at the end of the day, the right incentive structure, to make sure that you're incentivizing the right behavior. And that doesn't necessarily just mean monetary incentives, right? That could mean cultural incentives, like, rewarding failure. Failure can be a good thing. And a lot of the more nimble, agile, human-centered organizations have those types of cultures from, innately built in from their inception. And so, honestly, based on my experience with larger organizations, every CX-like engagement really at some point or another uncovers opportunities for some organizational optimization. It could be vast in that, you have, digital doesn't ever speak to marketing type of riffs, or it could just be nuanced things where it's just literally processes where people don't know each other across the organization because maybe it's just too big. So competing initiatives start to pop up, creating customer confusion. But, these it could be process related, talent related, operations related. Sometimes, honestly, it could be business model related. The business model you have is unfortunately against the benefit of your customer. And so we've had that conversation a couple of times with a few different industries. But, at the end of the day, a lot of, CX transformations actually, maybe not shockingly, start within transformative spaces within organizations. So, that might be a new category or a new audience expansion, new vertical, and maybe you acquire a new company. And so it gives you this like test lab, if you will, for innovation. And that can include, your mindset, which I would consider CX kind of an operating mindset of an organization. And so, these types of initiatives, those kind of lean and agile initiatives within organizations are great test labs for both CX and CX-like culture transformation. And so you can then use those types of things as organizations, those lab-like environments, to ultimately become marketing material then back to the broader organization to push then for adoption with not just leadership, but others within the organization to show literally this does work. We've proven it not just in theory, but within the four walls of our own company.
Does it work more effectively, or is it just another tool in the toolkit to kind of start with, in your experience, telling stories through small moments? I mean, we've talked about how very difficult it is, especially for long tenured companies, to kind of move the Titanic, so to speak. How important is it to show when you are investing in these things, you're starting to kind of move the needle, that you're showcasing the small wins that kind of lead to the larger wins?
No executive or really any organization is going to support an initiative that takes 5 years to pay out any kind of a return, right? Not just from a financial standpoint, but from a motivation standpoint, right? You have to be able to prove and show marginal and incremental wins along the way. And so, that's definitely an area where, it comes down to making sure, again, going back to the taxonomy of what you consider success, showing that you're making critical success in, customer and human terms against things that are solving real pain points for people. And that's pretty easy, pretty quickly within most organizations. If you starting to get into some of those kind of perception-based metrics we were talking about earlier. So, how easy is it to do business with us? You can uncover very quickly some very just, not just low hanging fruit, but like literally on the ground rotting, like ready to go fruit that you should have solved for yesterday, because you just framed things up in a way that makes you empathize with a customer in a way that is just, completely accepted by the organization, because it's in the DNA of what your company, your brand promise really is. And so those types of things come out as really quick wins in a longer tail of transformation.
The other thing that we get asked about a lot, and it goes back to knowing that there are problems to solve, but like you said, shining the light on things that may not necessarily bode well the way things look for your company at current, but being willing to have those tough conversations, you might uncover that there are a lot of things that you got to solve, maybe a lot of low-hanging fruit, maybe a lot of the things that, to your example, are rotting on the ground. There are going to come times where you have to start to prioritize which story are you going to tell your executives in order to take that first step? What's the first story that you're going to prioritize to move the meter and start that journey? How does one prioritize which of the stories you think will resonate when you're trying to get the budget you need, the investment you need, the support you need to start moving the ball?
In its most simplest terms possible, the best way to answer that would be, again, just kind of looking at it from three different angles. The first is customer benefit. So are we solving the biggest pain points for our customers as determined by research and, all of the things that would substantiate that, right? How are we prioritizing the customer pain points we're solving for? The second area would be, how much business value does solving that customer pain point create? So kind of, intentionally inverting the business and customer impact, because we want to make sure at the end of the day, customer benefit is what we lead this conversation with. And so then the last piece really is, how hard is it to achieve whatever that thing is? And so we may come out of a transformation like plan with 30 different really big initiatives that need to be done. Clearly, they all can't be done at the same time, but by prioritizing and looking at which ones create the most business value, customer value, and ultimately are the easiest to accomplish, are the ones that would get prioritized for immediate action. And those are, as you think about going back up to the discussion we were having earlier around ROI and when do I get, quote, ROI, that's a good way to start to show quick wins through that assessment of, how hard is the feasibility of some of the things we're trying to achieve. And unfortunately, sometimes the difficulty in feasibility isn't, it's technically difficult. It might be, to the conversation we were just having, culturally difficult. Mm-hmm. And so those are some of those things you can elevate to senior leaders within an organization to help advocate for on your behalf and really truly become some of the success stories of how organizations have brought groups together on behalf of customers to then accelerate both business and customer experience.
Super, super interesting. Colin, before we wrap up, I want to kind of go off the beaten path and talk less about business, more about you and your hobbies and the things that keep you busy when you're off the clock. You said you're the father of 2 girls, and obviously that in itself is enough to keep you busy. But what kind of things do you get into after hours?
Yeah, I have way too many hobbies, Nick, I think is the answer to that question. Adventure and travel, drumming, music, all things Jeeps. Sorry to any of our automotive clients, but I've been a Jeep lifer. And snow sports, you name it, right? I love, again, anything that's kind of adrenaline focused is really a great reprieve from my day-to-day life. But, honestly, I think one of the things, like the ultimate hobby, is just exposing my kids to those types of things. And just the more I can share with them, the better. I mean, I had throughout the past year, it's been a really interesting year, but just 2 kind of random proud dad moments that pop out where, one, watching my 7-year-old daughter air it out in the terrain park at our local ski hill and actually get a little nervous about the amount of air she had underneath her, but she came up just like all smiles. And then the second was watching her keep pretty much a good 4/4 beat on my drum kit, so that really at least I'm doing something right in the dad department that they're picking up these types of things. So anyway, too many hobbies would probably likely be my thing. I'm not an expert in any of them. I just like to dabble in all of them, I guess is a good way to say it.
And how fun is it that you're able to kind of share those types of passions? Like, that's got to be just the coolest thing. And I'm pushing 40 and I don't know how to drum. So she's already got me beat by about 3x.
Well, Nick, we'll have to work on that. It's not as hard as you think.
All right. Well,
never too late to start.
I may accept your challenge. We shall see. Great stuff again today, Colin. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's been a good discussion.
And thanks to you all for listening to Human Centered as well. To learn more about our CX practice and our approach to the work, check us out online at vmlyr.com/CX. We'd also love to hear your feedback on the show. Give us a rating and offer up your thoughts wherever you listen to your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon, and more. Have a topic idea or just want to drop us a line? You can connect with me on Twitter at Nick Brunker or shoot us an email. The address is humancentered@vmlyr.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.